Datadog is a SaaS cloud monitoring and security platform that enables full-stack observability for modern infrastructure and applications at any scale, providing teams dashboarding, alerting, application performance monitoring, infrastructure monitoring, UX monitoring, security monitoring, and log management in one tightly integrated platform, plus 450 plus out-of-the-box integrations with technologies including cloud providers, databases, and web servers. Aggregate all your data into one platform for seamless correlation, enabling teams to troubleshoot and collaborate together in one place, preventing downtime and enhancing performance and reliability. Get started with a free 14-day trial by visiting datadog.com/cloudcast. That's datadog.com/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. Another Sunday Perspective show as we move along into April. Things are starting to warm up a little bit, although we did get some snow here in North Carolina in April, which is rather unusual, but hope everybody's doing well. I want to kind of dig into something that I thought was an interesting conversation that was going on Twitter, and an interesting article by Matt Assay, a friend of the show. And that really kind of dives into this idea of how fast does technology does it really change, and how fast is it adopted? And I think, those two things sometimes go hand in hand, but sometimes they tend to go kind of in an opposite direction. And I think what was interesting about the article and about sort of thinking about this was, we're, 10, 15 years into cloud computing, probably 8 years or so into sort of this sort of cloud native push that became sort of formalized with the CNCF and so forth. And yet we look at, certain surveys and certain metrics of really core technologies, whether they're programming languages or databases or infrastructure or, other types of things. And a lot of times we go, boy, the things that were there 5 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago are still the leading things. And why is that the case, right? We've seen what appears to be a lot of adoption, really big numbers, at least in terms of growth numbers for some new technologies, some new capabilities, whether it's a NoSQL database or containers in Kubernetes or, cloud usage, whatever it might be. And yet, when we come back and we look at the bigger picture, we kind of pull back and focus on, how much is really being used of some of the new things versus existing things. Oftentimes we find that the new stuff just isn't as big. And I thought that would be sort of an interesting topic to deal with and sort of dig into. We'll do that right after the break. Today's show is sponsored by CloudZero. For software-driven companies focused on growing margins, CloudZero is the only cloud cost intelligence platform that puts engineering in control by connecting technical decisions to business results. By analyzing cloud services like AWS and Snowflake, CloudZero provides real-time cost insights that help you maximize margins. Engineering teams can answer critical questions like, who are my most expensive customers? How much does this specific feature cost our business? What's the cost impact of re-architecting this application? With cost anomaly alerts via Slack, product-specific data views, and granular engineering context that makes it easy to investigate any cost, CloudZero is your complete cloud cost intelligence platform, connecting the dots between high-level trends and individual line items. Join companies like Drift, Rapid7, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today. That's cloudzero.com/cloudcast.
Still using SSH keys, RDP logins, and database credentials? It's time to access your infrastructure like it's no longer 1999. StrongDM is the only modern infrastructure access platform. It creates a seamless, secure, and observable air gap between your staff and the critical infrastructure that powers your company. Instantly revoke access to every database, Kubernetes cluster, or server with a click. Automatically log every query, SSH, and kube control command to know who did what, when, and where across your stack. Eliminate credentials from end-user workflows to deploy access that's zero trust and least privilege by default. Trusted by your peers at Peloton, SoFi, Yext, and Chime, StrongDM is the only way to deploy secure access controls in a way folks love to use. But who believes an ad? Check it out for yourself with a no BS demo. Sign up at www.strongdm.com/get A-demo.
And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, I want to kind of dig a little bit into, do we see a lot of, rapid technology change? Do we see things, happening as fast as they may perceive to be in certain circles of technology? Or is, the speed of new technology really just kind of a small blip on the radar? And it was interesting. So Matt Assay, who works over at MongoDB, but has been in a number of places, has been very involved with open source. Wrote an interesting article. He writes quite a bit of interesting stuff for Tech Republic. Anyways, good follow on Twitter, and his articles are always fairly thought provoking. He looks at sort of bigger picture things, and ultimately, what he got to looking at was a couple of things. Obviously, he sort of lives in the database space. The database world does a pretty good job of kind of laying out, what technologies are being used and how big and so forth. And then, he sort of compared that as well to some really good work that the folks at RedMonk do every year to look at like programming languages. And what he sort of concluded, or what he was sort of looking at was, how much are we seeing a shift in database technologies as well as programming languages over the last number of years. And the nice thing is all this data sort of gets kept around, and you can compare year to year and 3-year and 5-year and 10-year trends and so forth. And what he was kind of digging into was, there's so much buzz, there's so much hype, there's so much money invested, there's so many, people attending events and so forth for things like, KubeCon or, the spring events or, database conferences or whatever they might be. And yet, when we look at the numbers of adoption, they tend to seem like they're pretty stable. They tend to not change year after year and so forth. And he was kind of trying to figure out, why was that the case? Are we sort of misleading ourselves with the hype around some of the new technologies, or maybe are people maybe misreporting numbers or whatever? I don't know that he was necessarily implying that, but so I thought it would be sort of an interesting thing to dig into, and I got to thinking about it a lot because we sort of project ourselves on this show as really focusing on what's new, and I think for the most part, if you look at the topics that we have, the trends, the guests, and so forth, we've always tried to focus on what's coming next, what's sort of new, what's tip of the spear, those types of things. And yet, I think when Aaron and I really talk about things, whether it's off the air or we do sometimes on our end of year show or mid year shows or whatever, I think we always kind of keep coming back to this thing of there's nothing, especially in the enterprise space. And again, I think we're starting to get to a point where the enterprise space and the consumer space are starting to diverge again, right? There was a period of time when, consumer space for technology usage and, websites and so forth, is always tends to be fairly leading edge because, it's keeping up with trends in what people are doing, right? Like it can have a trend for 6 months, it can have a trend for a year, and then the trends can change. And whereas that doesn't necessarily happen in the enterprise. But we did go through a period of time, kind of 05 to 07 to 08, 09, there were some crashes and some changes in the web and so forth, in which we really saw the enterprise starting to adopt a lot of the things that were going on in consumer technology. And, some of the underlying technologies were starting to bleed over quite a bit. And so, we were starting to see, more of more in the enterprise moving quickly, trying to sort of keep up with what was going on in consumer, because you were getting a lot of people moving into the workforce who were used to using consumer technologies and wanting those to be there for their day-to-day work, right? They didn't necessarily want to create a bifurcation or a gap between how they lived their life day-to-day with computers and then how they did their work day-to-day. So that was going on. And then, I think what we see is we've obviously seen a lot of adoption, I should say a lot. We've seen adoption in the enterprise of some of these new technologies, whether they were public cloud computing or open source technologies and so on and so forth. So that trend is definitely there. But what's interesting, I think, is to figure out, well, have those things taken over what is kind of traditional enterprise? And I know for most of you that tune into this show, you're probably more focused on what would be considered enterprise types of technologies, because you're either delivering those technologies, you're building those technologies, you're using them, maybe you're selling them, whatever it might be. And I think the biggest thing is it's not so much are the technologies not getting the things done. It's there's a lot of inertia that works against new technologies. So let me kind of walk through this a little bit. If you think about most companies that are in this sort of enterprise space, not necessarily like vendors, but companies that are doing things, right? Selling, business to business type of customers, or even, business to consumer, but, maybe in a more kind of traditional manner. So think of like a, Home Depot or something, right? Like they're not necessarily in like the fad business, other than, they're in the business of, what's the latest colors or fads for your kitchen, but they're not really like in a fad business. I mean, they're still selling things to help you update your house, right? And that's not really changing, not in a radical way. I mean, they're not becoming Bitcoin or something like that. And if you think about those types of companies, or the ones that sell B2B, most of their budget, 70, 80% of their budget in most cases, and this number hasn't really fluctuated all that much in many, many years, is spent on maintaining the existing systems they have, right? They made investments 5 years ago, 10 years ago into these systems, and most of the money that they have goes into maintaining those. So the amount of budget that's available, somewhere between 20 and 30% for new things, is inherently going to be smaller, right? So the impact that 20% can have in terms of how much is used, by definition, is going to be smaller, right? And then the next piece is, we typically don't see, and this is sort of this running joke that we've had every time we've had Brandon Wichert on the show. We talk about, his fictitious conference that eventually might actually happen, called Legacy Conf. Most technologies, at least in the enterprise, never die. Like they stick around for very, very long times. At some point, we do retire certain things, but a lot of stuff sticks around for a long time. And so, a lot of times these new technologies don't replace old technologies. They just sort of augment them, right? Or they're additive, or they're, kind of another thing to the side of what they do, right? And that could be on the infrastructure space. It could be on the data and database side. It could be in development, wherever it could be. And then the last piece is, oftentimes when the new technologies come in, if you were to just ask, I don't know, your infrastructure team, hey, for whatever reason we've decided we're going to use Kubernetes, or we're going to use AWS, or we're going to use whatever, those teams typically couldn't on day one just pick them up and run with them, right? There's going to be some amount of learning curve. And obviously this is why we've seen, a huge uptick in the number of companies that are offering certifications in these spaces, training, different ways of doing training. And that's all awesome. We've covered that a lot on this show. But the reality is, a lot of times companies will go, well, we've made a determination that technology is needed for business reasons, for technology reasons, for pace of change reasons, whatever drives it. And a lot of times they'll say, look, I don't have 18 months, 24 months, 36 months for you to get up to speed. I'm not displacing you, but I'm going to have to bring in some new people to work on that technology. And this is where, we get into the crunch of, there's just not enough people. It's sort of the old joke of, hey, it's 2015 and somebody just posted a job thing that said, hey, I need somebody with 5 years of Kubernetes experience. Okay, well, it doesn't exist, right? It didn't exist in 2017. It didn't exist in 2018. Maybe it existed in 2019, right? So oftentimes, we're trying to bring in people, we oftentimes have to bring in new people, and, they're going to focus all of their time on that new technology, right? They've just got a basic understanding of the new technology. It's sort of the thing we joke about a lot. Sometimes you just have to be 5 minutes smarter than everybody else in the room, because that's all you have in terms of different experience as to what's going on. So those three things really come into play. Now, when we look at that hiring of new talent, again, it really goes to the learning curves can be very long on these technologies, right? It takes a number of years to get better at these things. I mean, if we take the Malcolm Gladwell example of, you need to get 10,000 hours of something to become an expert. Okay, well, let's say we take 2,000 hours. Well, that's basically a full year of somebody doing nothing but that technology, 8 to 5 every day for 50 weeks a year. That's 2,000 hours. That's an entire year of doing it, right? Most companies aren't going to be able to afford that for their existing employees, because they've been allocated to current work. And so what ends up happening is, the new talent is hard to find. Oftentimes the ones who are available become expensive. And if they're not expensive after their first run at this stuff, they're going to become expensive the second time through, right? This is where we see resume-driven development and resume-driven projects happening, where people recognize that, getting certain words on their resume and having a year's worth of experience, 2 years worth of experience makes them really, really valuable. And oftentimes, and we've seen this a lot, they end up jumping to other jobs and they're able to increase their salary. And so, that becomes, again, challenging when only 20 to 30% of your budget is being allocated to these new things. If you're paying a much higher rate for new people, oftentimes that's going to reduce the ability of that new technology to really, really, have a huge impact, right? It can have a big impact, but in terms of volume or capacity, it may not necessarily be able to have as big of an impact as something that's been around for 5 or 10 years, and you have 20 or 30 people that are dedicated to work on that sort of thing. So maybe it's a database technology or an infrastructure technology, whatever it might be. The next thing to really think about is, as much as everybody likes to say, well, here's this new technology and in 5 minutes you'll be up and running, and here's a case study that says this company saved 90% of what they previously did. It often takes a while to get the new technology running and maturing, right? So, I've lived in the Kubernetes world for a long time now, and it's not unusual to work with a company to see them evolve in what they do and begin to understand it. But to take 2 years, 3 years before they really kind of mature into how does it work, people understand it, they've made changes to their processes or they've implemented new processes and so forth. So, those things can take a while. So again, you get people who, maybe start a couple years later than the technology originally starts. They have to ramp up some teams. Those teams are trying to grow some people that don't necessarily exist. And then, it can take a few years to sort of even the technology to mature, let alone your usage of it to mature. And again, it's not unusual for that to take, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. So you're dealing with a lot of things that are probably more expensive, at least initially, than they originally were. They have smaller budgets than existing things. The technology is maturing. The people who are able to implement the technology are small, and for them to put it in place and get it to work in organizations that have other rules and guidelines and so forth, it can take a while. And then the last thing is, we work in very competitive markets. We work in spaces that look at new technologies and other things as sometimes threats. They're just disruptive to people's business model, to companies' business model, in some cases to a technology's, sort of life or death of whether a technology will exist. So, the last thing we see all the time is it's not unusual for an incumbent technology, whether it's a programming language or a database or whatever, to go, oh, okay, I kind of ignored that new thing for a while, but it's now starting to get buzz and it's starting to, come into conversations that companies are having with, technology groups or technology vendors or whatever it might be. And I need to add that, right? Like I need to sort of expand my portfolio, what I've been able to do. I need to add that, and we're just going to make it sort of a feature of the broader legacy technology. And so, we've seen this where, Oracle will begin to add NoSQL capabilities to their, SQL databases. We've seen the Java ecosystem go from Java EE to Java Spring to some of the new things like Quarkus and so forth. And so, again, those things all sort of fall into Java. And the reason those things get done is partially because, they're trying to stave off disruption. But the other part is there's a recognition that, moving from, say, one version of Java, one variant of Java to another variant of Java, even though they might be different, is probably an easier lift, especially if programmers have a lot of background in that space and maybe they don't necessarily want to learn some new thing. They don't want to be, polyglot and understand Ruby and Go and Python and a bunch of stuff. Just sort of extending or changing how a programming language works might really make more sense than anything, at least economically, for the biggest number of people. So when you put all those things together, it's not by any means a knock. It doesn't mean that, it's not smart investments to see venture capitalists invest in new things. Obviously, there's typically going to be a reason for that. We've seen in a lot of cases, technologies spring out of cloud vendors, or companies that were in the cloud, and we're seeing them spun out as, open source projects or their own companies. And again, it's because typically they had already solved a problem. And the question becomes like, does that problem manifest itself in other businesses? And then once that happens, it starts to become, can we mature the technology? Can we find people that understand this technology and are willing to, take a chance on their career? And we get this, we get these emails all the time. We get DMs all the time from people going, hey, I'm pretty good at this thing, this stable, entrenched technology, but I'm seeing this other stuff happening. And it's interesting. But I'm wondering, should I make a jump to that? Right. And this is, again, one of those things that technologists are always debating. Should I sort of abandon or, put less focus on something that I'm really good at, an incumbent, kind of technology, something that's used all over the place that I probably could go find jobs are, but maybe the market for that has sort of stagnated, right? Like maybe you're not going to make as much money the next year or the next year being an expert in something that lots and lots of people are experts in. And they start wondering, okay, should I move to something else? Well, that becomes, again, another one of these things in which you're looking at, is the technology maturing enough? Do I want to jump over there? Am I going to be the first one having to try and learn this? Are there going to be projects out there? I think we have been seeing more and more, where, every company realizes they have to have an innovation part of what they do. So, we do see more and more adoption of these newer technologies. But I think, if we summarize all of this, it really comes back to those fundamental things of most people's budgets aren't allocated towards innovation, especially existing companies, maybe not so much startup companies, but, new companies. So, they've got to carve out budget to go after that innovation in a smart way. They've got to figure out how do they make this new technology work in their current world, because in a lot of cases they're not distinctly replacing something else, because especially if you're replacing something else, then the laundry list of capabilities you need or requirements becomes really long. So you're oftentimes trying to augment it. And then again, trying to fit that in as something new and being able to measure it in a way that, the new stuff doesn't look terrible or it doesn't look, just odd compared to the old systems, always comes into play. So I think all those things when taken together sort of explain what Matt was sort of noticing, looking at, a couple of aspects of the world, the things that were relevant to him. But I think, if we were to measure this for infrastructure, so if we were measuring, Kubernetes usage versus VMware, or we were measuring it as, data center capacity used in large businesses versus, a number of amount of capacity used in the public cloud, I think we would see similar types of things. And some will argue, oh, well, the public cloud's different. Maybe not, right? Like there's a lot of SaaS business that goes on in the public cloud and consumes a ton of resources. But I think, what Matt was seeing is really kind of the natural, normal, how things work all the time. And, we're always going to see new technologies come along. We're going to see really, really long tails of existing technologies stick around for a really long time because, it's sort of the if it ain't broke, don't fix it type of thing. It's doing its job. It may not be sexy. I've had people ping me who are 25, 28-year-old people who are programmers that work on mainframe, and they go, man, I know I'm not working on something sexy, but, it's good work. And, I think that mindset will be out there for a very long time because at the end of the day, it's still doing its job. It's serving the business. And yeah, it's not the sexiest thing in the world, but it's, it doesn't need to be ripped out just for the sake of ripping it out. It does its job. And maybe it's not the most cost effective, but it's also, the day-to-day, it is terribly effective. So anyways, I think what Matt kind of highlighted, at least on the surface, looks a little bit odd. I think in reality, when you really dig into it, it's just the natural tendency of technology. And like I said, I know Aaron and I have been, following this, at least from a podcast perspective, for 12 plus years. And that same trend has been going pretty consistently the entire time, in which, there's a lot of new stuff. But as a relative percentage of the big pie of what everybody works on and what everybody uses, it's still fits into that 20 to 25% maybe of what people spend their time and money on. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody enjoyed the show. And again, I would love to hear your stories if your company is way outside that 20-30% of what they spend on innovation. It's great if you're able to do that. I would love to hear sort of the business reasoning behind it, or the people reasoning behind it and how you've been successful with it. So if you have any of those, feel free to shoot us an email at show@thecloudcast.net or shoot us a DM to myself or Aaron or the Cloudcast account. With that, I'm going to wrap it up. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's starting to enjoy spring, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.